The What to Next podcast helps you build a TBR of future favorite books. In each episode, Lori and Maine interviews authors and book influencers to recommend books they loved for you to pick up today. If you're an avid reader, always looking for your next great read, then the show. Hi, Laura. Welcome to What to Next podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So happy to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am an author and journalist. I live in East London. And Wild Things is my third novel, but it's my first novel to come out in the US, so it's all really exciting.
Oh my gosh. So how is the process of, getting your books, because your books were published in, I'm assuming, the UK, and then getting a book deal in the US? What was the process? How was it different? How is it similar for those listeners who are interested in knowing more about it?
It was actually quite a similar process. My first book, I got a 2-book publishing deal for in the UK, and that one went to auction. And then I got a 2-book publishing deal with Wild Things, and that one went to auction. So it's all there's been like a real symmetry to it. But the whole thing, is beyond exciting. It doesn't really feel real.
This is really exciting. So when did you start writing?
So I've always written, which is a very boring standard answer, but it's the truth. But I didn't really consider that I could write fiction as a career until a few years ago. I was working as a journalist at the Guardian newspaper full time. And I had like a little idea in my head for a novel, and I wrote about 1,000 words of it, and then I tinkered with that 1,000 words for months, which is very common, I think, for me anyway. I got like the perfect first chapter, and then nothing else. And then I entered Penguin Random House do a scheme in the UK called Right Now for people who are in underrepresented or marginalized communities in publishing. And I thought, oh, well, what harm can it do to enter these words? And then the rest is history. So I have always written, but my writing fiction career has been somewhat short in sort of the past 5 years. And all seems to have happened very quickly and taken me by surprise, which is wonderful.
That is very exciting, and I love the journey. Love that even though it took quickly, like there was still the hesitancy of writing that perfect first chapter, and then realizing how can I write a whole full novel?
Yeah, totally terrifying.
Oh my gosh! All right, let's talk about Wild Things. What is the elevator pitch?
Okay, Wild Things is about a group of queer friends and their straight benefactor deciding to move out of London into a big house in the countryside, which they dub the queer commune. But it's really about being in love with your best friend and the relentless humiliation of having a crush.
Okay, you just talked a dream. I live in a big city. I live in New York for 14 years, and it took me a while. I had to transition out of New York to move to Chicago, which is another city, but it was the pandemic, so it was like my own small town romance. And I finally settled in Florida, and we're still looking for that. But the idea is every so often you live in the big city, you just want to escape to a commune with your friends.
Tell me about it. I mean, every few weeks, my friends and I will send each other a link to a massive, ridiculous house that's somewhere completely insane in the countryside, and it costs about £10. And we're like, why don't we just move here? We can live off the land, blah 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 blah. But we persist with London.
Yeah, you persist with the big life, but I think it's you're selling the dream of have this escape the city, go to a ramshackle house, build it up, do DIY,
Totally. Oh my gosh.
Great. And then I live with your crush, what else can you ask?
Exactly. It's perfect. It's all anyone wants.
It is all everyone wants. Everyone just wants to do that. So what was the process? Did you read romance beforehand, or like was it something you're like really something like when I'm writing fiction, I would like to have a rom-com, What kind of yeah.
Yeah. So I love reading rom-coms. I'm a real rom-com fan. When I started writing rom-coms, I was really just writing what I wanted to read.
Mhm.
Um, and I really wanted to read funny, light, like uplifting novels about queer people
Yeah.
where queerness wasn't the central plot.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily incidental to the plot, but it wasn't the plot. And that these stories just came spilling out of me. Um, so my first two novels are exactly that. And then Wild Things I actually wrote surprisingly quickly once I had the idea. Everything sort of was fully formed. I knew I wanted to write about what it's like to be in love with a friend, and I knew I wanted to write about the feeling of having a crush, which is just so fun and such torture. Um, and I wanted to write about escaping the city, or like choosing an alternative life, or prioritizing your chosen family, and all of those things. And it all kind of came together
Yeah.
nicely for me.
I
Yeah,
love that you're writing joy and you're not writing trauma. It's just like it's the good parts. It's what we strive for. Like it's an aspirational in some ways novel. Like someone who's like looking for something, you're like looking for joy. Will have that idea,
totally.
like, that escape that's possible, having that found family, that allows you, that accepts you just as who you are without any questions.
Exactly that. Like I really want every character that I write, I always want for them to experience joy and know that they deserve love and happiness, and surround them with those things. I think it such makes for such a pleasurable reading experience.
So exciting. So what are you working next? So you have a two-book deal. So I'm assuming you have like another book coming up, in
I do have another book that I'm working on at the moment, which I'm really excited about. And classically can't say anything else about.
it is,
That's all
oh,
I can say.
it is so good. Awesome. So let's chat some book recommendations. What kind of books do you tend to read?
I read everything. When I'm writing, I tend not to read within the genre because I find myself being like, hey, I've just had a great idea, and then I realize it's something that I've just read. So when I'm writing, I actually tend to read something like wildly different, like crime or thrillers or whatever it is, which I really enjoy. I'm obsessed with. I've become really obsessed. There's an author called Will Dean who has a series about this deaf Swedish journalist called Tuva Moodyson, and the whole series is absolutely amazing, and I love it. That's a massive recommendation. And then but I do love when I'm not writing to read rom-coms. I especially love to read queer rom-coms. And I'm just looking at my shelf. That's where I'm appearing off to. Yeah. So what have I read recently? I actually really recently read a book called Infamous by Lex Croucher, which is
Mm-hmm.
a queer sort of like Regency.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. It's like if you loved like Bridgerton but wanted it to be queer, that's
Yeah.
Infamous. Have you read it?
I read it. It's so good.
It's so good. Isn't it so good? I love it. Yeah.
It's so good. It's like Mean Girls, Bridgerton, kind of like,
Yeah. It's so funny. So
Yeah.
funny. I love it when a book really properly makes me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
And it does that. And I also have I read it a while ago, but I've reread it since it was published. Read Really Good Actually by Monica Heisey.
Ooh, I haven't heard about that one. Tell me all about it.
So that is a book about a woman who gets divorced when she's very young, when she's 28, and her sort of journey through that. And it is so funny and sharp and well observed and well executed. And Monica's she writes for TV primarily, like she worked on Schitt's Creek and various other bits. It's perfect. It's pitch perfect. I loved that.
Oh my gosh, adding this to the TBR for sure. So, Laura, tell us where we can find you online.
So I am on Instagram at Laura EK. I'm on Twitter at Laura Eliza K, and my website is lauraKauthor.co.uk.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura, for being on the show.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support the podcast. For a list of books mentioned and other book recommendations, please visit whattoreadnextblog.com. Thank you so much for listening and happy reading.